Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started now. Let me go ahead and shut the door.
Like chocolates that are kind of, they're not perfect. The chocolate, and she brought two for me, so I have 6 pounds.
Okay, let's by the way, the microphone is live. I can hear your discussion on chocolate. So anyway, so that's okay. You didn't say anything inappropriate.
Chocolate.
Yeah, so, okay, we are going to wrap up chapter 13 this morning and start chapter 14. They're both very short, and we might get chapter 14 done. If we don't, I'll finish it on Thursday. And what I'd like to do is, if I get done in time on Thursday in lecture, we'll do the final exam review. If not, I'd like to do the final exam review Thursday afternoon. So whether you can make it or not, I'm going to record it and post it in eLearn on YouTube for you. And it the review seems to really help it. The last 2 times I've done it, you know, people have done fairly well on the final exam. If you've done well in your exams, you should do well in your final. There's nothing new on the final exam, other than the fact that it's 100 questions instead of 50. It still only counts the same as a regular lecture test. It doesn't count 20% like it used to. So that's a good thing. Now, the exam in here is scheduled for, let's see, 10:15 to 12:15 on Tuesday of exam week. Now, the way I intend to do that is to, if you want to take it on the ground, you can come in and take it in here. If you want to take it online, you can take it online. I'll leave it open for 24 hours. You'll have plenty of time to take it in that 24-hour window. You won't have 24 hours to let it run. Sorry, Cameron, but you'll have a 24-hour window which you can take it. Now, it will be open for, since it's 100 questions, it's open for 2 hours, I think, 120 minutes, something like that. So there's more than enough time to go through all the questions. And so
if we take it in person, is it just on paper, like scan?
if it's on paper, yeah, if you take it in person, it'll be a paper test with a Scantron, and I'll have your answer, you know, your grade right away.
Okay, and so with it being, the online version being open 24 hours, is that like midnight Tuesday, or when does that start?
I would start it, well, I can start it at 8 o'clock in the morning and let it run till 8 the next morning, you know, or something like that.
Okay.
Actually, what I should do is start it at the same time your test starts. So that would be 10:15 on Tuesday. So I could open it at 10:15 Tuesday and let it run till 10:15 on Wednesday, or to 12:15 on Wednesday, something like that. And that would give you 24 hours plus 2, I think, to take it. So you'd have, you know, you could wait till Wednesday morning to take it if you wanted to. But it'll be in that time frame. The reason I'm so particular about a short window is because I got to have grades in by Friday, and I need time to process everything. So I can't give you a week like I have been doing for the regular exams. So that's just.
So that next week?
That's next week.
Okay.
Yeah, because they put us up against a hard deadline we can't slide past. So anyway, so think about it. You know, I got to be here. I'll be more than happy to give exams on the ground. Online, you're used to taking online exams, you know, so it shouldn't be any different. Just remember that I didn't write this exam. I'll just tell you that. So. It doesn't mean anything. It just means I didn't write this exam. So
In your experience, is it, at least to the student's opinion, kind of relaying back to you, has the exam seemed to be pretty general in comparison to the tradition of like, 2 chapter-based exams, whereas this is the entire semester, so it kind of takes a more broad view of things, or is it just about specific with?
it's going to be specific. It's going to be specific in each topic area.
Okay.
And if I remember correctly, the exam tends to go in segments so that you work your way through the course in the exam.
So it's actually somewhat chronological,
Yeah, yeah. So you would get,
like maybe 10 questions for the
yeah,
first
you might get 10 questions on the nervous system. I'll tell you that the last 2 chapters usually get the short end because they're so short, and we don't get a lot of it. There usually aren't a lot of questions in the last 2 chapters. Expect a lot of questions on 11 and 12 and 6 and 9. There will definitely be questions on the metabolism chapter. So expect, but again, they're not going to be, how many NADHs are made in step 3 of the Krebs cycle, the first time around? We don't do that. Okay. She's saying, what's an NADH? I'm just trying to remember what an NADH is. So.
Well, just the fact that it's multiple choice means we can recognize the answers.
Well, that's it. That's it. One thing about the final exam, though, is it does help you,
You can cross-reference.
yeah, question 30 may help you on question 70. So, and that's how it's designed, so that the knowledge you use on question 30 may come back to help you on question 70. There will be no, on the on-ground version, there are no repeat questions. I don't think that you should have repeat questions on the online version, but you just never know what eLearn does. So,
I had some repeat questions in the lab test.
of course, because it randomizes. If there was a way to randomize without pulling the same question in, it's
Also, that's why it happens. So it literally just pulls from the same sample every time.
right. I have a test bank of about 150 questions that it draws from. Everybody gets a different exam, but sometimes it'll pull the same question twice.
Yeah, I've definitely had that in my experience.
Yeah.
Also.
So, and that works for you and against you. If you didn't know it the first time, well, not actually, if you weren't certain the first time, you could pick one answer and then at least you're going to get one of them right.
Unless both of your options are wrong.
I actually did that. There's a true and false question that I had twice. I did
Mhm.
true on one
So-
and false.
Okay. Well, anyway, right now the plan is on Tuesday morning, I'll be here at 10:15. The test will open up online at 10:15. The paper copy will be here, and you can take it then, or you can take it online. I'm happy either way. And then we'll be done with it.
And then one last thing, are the questions usually pulled from like the OpenStax version of the lessons that we've been doing, or is it more just across the board over years, like the questions?
The faculty contribute questions, and then they're all put into we sit around and have this really ugly meeting where we all attack each other's questions. Like, that's the stupidest question I've ever heard. Don't think we,
Ideas.
that's, sometimes it gets like that. So people are very passionate about their questions.
Okay.
But everybody contributes about 20 or 30 questions, and we put them all in a pool. We go through, and every so often we get together and go through and yank out the questions that are too stupid. I mean, I'm sorry, that are too, either too difficult or too easy. Like, what color is blood?
Did somebody actually name that? I guess like because of the blue thing that went around.
Yeah. So,
Fake, right?
so but I'm exaggerating, but we try to give you the best questions that are not, too, that are appropriate for the course. This is a 200 level anatomy course. It is not a 600 level graduate level detailed pathophysiology course. It's designed for A&P1 or A&P2. You get the kind of questions that are appropriate. They should challenge you, but they shouldn't be impossible. So nothing you haven't seen already. When is exam 5 due? Exam 5 is not due until May the 2nd. The only reason that's a good question, by the way. You're not the first person to have that problem. For whatever reason, eLearn is now, when the test opens up, or when the test, because exam 5 just opened up, because I'm going to finish up the exam 5 content hopefully today. If not, I'll push it back 2 days. Exam 5 hasn't opened. Nobody's taken it yet, or if it has opened and nobody's still taken it, it records a 0. Your grade is not a 0. Your grade is nothing because you haven't taken it yet. As soon as you take the exam, it will show your score. I don't know why it's doing that. It's been doing that. It started doing that about a week ago. So it showed up first in AP2. So now it's spread to AP1. So just ignore the 0. Yes. We've had more problems with eLearn this spring than we've ever had before. So anyway, so don't panic over that. There's not much I can't fix when dealing with eLearn, so. Okay, any other comments or questions before we get started? Then I'm going to go into chapter 13 and we're going to talk about pain. As we had been going through the section on the somatosensory area of the brain. Remember that the somatosensory area is the area behind the central sulcus. It starts at the post-central gyrus, at ridge behind the central sulcus. All of our sensory input comes into that area. It is made up of the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe. Remember, the frontal lobe is motor. Motor activities are all mostly confined to the frontal lobe. Sensory is parietal, temporal, occipital, and also the insula. And what happens is that sensory input comes in on the sensory branches of the cranial and spinal nerves and enters the brain and enters the spinal cord in the brain. It goes to the thalamus. The thalamus, sitting on top of the diencephalon, will route the signals, the action potentials, to the appropriate areas. The thalamus sends visual action potentials to the visual cortex. Touch and proprioception go to the somatosensory cortex. Auditory goes to the auditory cortex, and so on. And all these areas are surrounded by association areas because the cortex gets the action potential and says, oh, that's an action potential for vision. Now what do I do with it? The association area tells you what it is. It tells you what the signal, what the action potential means. So, pain. We have to be able to identify pain. If we don't perceive pain, it's not happening. When we get into A&P2, we'll talk a lot about a condition known as neuropathy. Neuropathy is where the nerve endings, the free nerve endings that deal with pain, are destroyed because of poor circulation. Diabetes, diabetes mellitus impairs circulation. This has nothing to do right now with what we're talking with directly about pain. But the reason we talk about pain is because pain is a sensory perception, is a sensory signal. Pain receptors dump into the somatosensory area just like all the other sensory receptors do. One of the big things about pain is pain's designed to warn us of impending danger to our skin. It hurts, yank your hand back. We talk about that all the time with reflexes. Now, as I mentioned with diabetes, this is where pain, pain becomes an issue for us. We don't feel pain. See, diabetes starts reducing circulation to our capillaries. It causes the free nerve endings that detect pain to stop functioning. So your patient develops neuropathy, an absence of pain sensation, right? Absence of any sensation. So your diabetic patient bumps their leg and bruises it and doesn't notice it. They don't know that they've hurt their leg. They don't feel anything. They have impaired blood supply. So not only do they not feel anything, they don't heal properly. And usually their first indication that something's wrong is when they smell the skin rotting away. So, because that's what happens. Injuries to your feet, to your toes, to your fingers are very common in diabetes. In fact, there's a whole subset of healthcare providers that deal strictly in wound management because of these diabetic injuries, and also an even smaller subset that deals with pain management. And that's when you get into, you know, the gray area of a little too much pain management. Yeah, so now, anyway, that's what you're going to look. You can look forward to in AP2. Now, what pain is of course an action potential, and it is triggered by temperature and pressure and trauma, you know, burns and you know, blunt force trauma or cut, you know, sharp edge trauma, things like this. The pain, the perception of pain is delivered to the temporal, parietal, and temporal and parietal areas so that you can process it and determine what is causing the pain. You know, if your toe hurts, you're not going to yank your hand back from a hot surface. You know, you have to know what, you know, if you put your hand on something hot, you yank your hand back. That's a spinal reflex. If you step on something sharp, you yank your foot back because it hurts. That's a reflex. You know, pain is our body's way of saying, stop doing that. It's not a good idea. A lot faster than that, though. Now, some pain is chronic, and meaning long-term pain. And we don't ever adapt to pain, but we can mitigate the effects of the pain by releasing neurotransmitters that sort of allow us to work around the pain. The pain is still there. We never block the pain completely, but we can at least knock the level of it down. Because, you know, if you've hurt your back, for example, or you've hurt your knee, it's going to be sore, but you can you know, as we say, well, I got used to the pain. Well, you didn't get used to it, and that's okay. Let people say that. You adapted to the pain so that it isn't this overwhelming thing. But every so often, if you've hurt your knee, for example, every so often it will come back to remind you, hey, you know, I still hurt. You know, it's still painful. You know, it isn't like you can release your own endorphins and completely get rid of the pain. You can sort of deal with it. You know, it's like taking Tylenol when you really need Tylenol 3, you know, or something like that with a little codeine in there. The pain gets knocked down, but it doesn't go away. So, now, pain is nothing but action potentials. Now, the intensity of the pain is measured by the frequency of the action. It's just like anything else. The intensity of any stimulus is based on how many action potentials you're getting per second. The more intense something is, temperature or volume or pain, you're going to increase the frequency of receiving the action potential. But those action potentials are going to be exactly the same. So when we say here, we all perceive pain at the same intensity. Well, we do. They're all the same size action potentials. You know. However, our ability to deal with that pain is what varies. It is pain tolerance. When we say we are sensitive to pain, we have a low tolerance to pain. Doesn't mean that we have a low threshold. Our threshold level for pain is all the same, but we may not deal with it well. So, and so whether or not we release endorphins, whether or not we release substance P to deal with pain in large quantities or lesser quantities, our tolerance levels are all going to be different. Some people do very well. Some people have a low tolerance to pain. Some have a high tolerance to pain. The intensity is always the same though. So, visceral pain. Visceral pain is what we run into in the viscera, meaning the internal organs, anything in the thoracic or abdominal pelvic cavity. If our large intestine is, if your patient's constipated, they have pain in their large intestine because fecal matter is not moving through as smoothly as it could. Perhaps the water content has dropped a little bit, and it only takes, constipation caused from a drop in water content in fecal matter. It doesn't take much, like 1%. Diarrhea doesn't take much, an increase by about 1%. So pretty specific, because fecal matter is only about 30% solids, 70% water. A swing of 1% each direction can cause unpleasantness to occur. But also bloating and in the small intestine, or inflammation from the gallbladder or the appendix or things like that. Or maybe you feel stretched. You've eaten a lot of gas-producing, methane-producing foods that make you feel bloated and stretched, and you're just uncomfortable. Perhaps your patient has torn a hole in their diaphragm. It's what's called a hiatal hernia. Perhaps they're having spasms. We call them cramps often. So, visceral pain, anything within the thoracic and abdominal cavity. Now, referred pain, we've talked about this in lab. Referred pain deals with pain apparently coming from one part of the body, but originating in a different location. Like having the common one is many people that are having a heart attack experience pain down their left arm. And the reason that this occurs is that pain in the left arm is let me back this up. These somatic pain receptors in our skin, the nerves that the pain receptors send their signals down in our skin, are the same axons that we use for nerves that innervate the heart. They share the pathway with those same neurons, those same axons. So like when you innervate the skin and you're innervating the heart, they're sharing the same passageway. Now it doesn't mean that every time you get a nick or a cut on your hand or on your arm, your left arm, that your heart's going to hurt. Doesn't work like that. But if you're having a heart attack and chest pains, since those chest pains are originating here, but sharing the same passageway with pain from your skin, sometimes people that are having a heart attack perceive pain in their left arm. Or that same nerve involved with this also innervates the left mandible. And it's not unusual for people to be having a heart attack, have no chest pain, but have a incredibly bad toothache on the left side of the mandible, or have pain in their abdomen all the way down below the umbilicus region, because the same nerve that innervates the heart also innervates those areas too. And so your pain can show up here or here or here or down your left arm. Or the gallbladder. The pain from the gallbladder also passes through the same pathways as pain from your shoulder. So it's not unusual to have a gallbladder attack and have pain on your right shoulder, along with pneumonia, heart attack, and stuff like that. So the problem is that these visceral pains are going to travel on the same pathways that somatic pain does. And so it fools us into thinking that, oh, well, I'm not having a heart attack, but I got a really bad toothache. You know, my gallbladder's fine. I'm nauseated, vomiting, I'm flatulent, and I have a high fever, and my right shoulder hurts, but it's not my gallbladder. You know, so, and the problem with referred pain is sometimes it really is a sore right shoulder and not the gallbladder. You know, it's, you know, pain throws us a real curve here. You know, sometimes a sore left arm is just a sore left arm. And other times it's one of the symptoms of a heart attack. You can't discount anything, at least initially. You have to start evaluating your patient. So that's pain. We've covered this in lab, and you know, it just just think about this. Every time you hit your elbow on the electronon process, you hit your you stimulate your ulnar nerve or your funny bone, crazy bone, whatever you call it. And you feel that not at your elbow, but you feel it in your fingers, because the pathways for pain reception that are running through your hand, going back up to the central nervous system, are the same ones that the ulnar nerve is using here. And so if you hit the elbow and stimulate the ulnar nerve, which runs right underneath the electronon process, our elbow, it doesn't hurt there, it hurts at your fingers. So, okay. Now the nerve itself, nerves are very interesting. They have a very similar structure to muscle cells. Now nerves don't move. And remember that nerves are only in the peripheral nervous system. They're called tracts in the central nervous system, myelinated axons. So a nerve is a collection of hundreds, maybe thousands of axons together. Most are myelinated, some are not. The nerves can either be a spinal nerve or a cranial nerve. We only have 12 cranial nerves. We have 31 spinal nerves. And the nerve itself is made up of axons wrapped around by myelin, covered by a layer of connective tissue known as the endoneurium. Remember the endomysium in skeletal muscle, wraps around the individual muscle cell? Well, here we have the endoneurium that surrounds the individual axon. Now the axons are clustered together in fascicles. You've probably heard that term before, fascicles, just like in a muscle cell. And the fascicles are surrounded by the perineurium, just like the paramysium in a muscle. And then all the fascicles together form the nerve, and there's an outer layer of connective tissue surrounding on the surface of the nerve called the epineurium. It looks something like this. There's the drawing. We can see the individual fascicles. You know, this is a fascicle here, that's a fascicle. This is a fascicle, there's a fascicle. We have the perineurium surrounding each fascicle. We have the endoneurium surrounding each axon. And then the entire large nerve is surrounded by the epineurium. This is what it looks like for real. These are all axons in here. Every one of those is an axon surrounded by its own endoneurium. Now the axon doesn't move. The axon doesn't move. The nerve doesn't move like a muscle does. But we keep all of our, we have thousands of axons in each nerve. Part of that's redundancy, because we're not making any new axons. At least I don't think we are anyway. We could be, but that's not yet. So as our axons wear out over a lifetime, we still have 99% of the axons we started with are still there. Now, because what we've seen is that if we're not going to notice if a couple axons wear out over time, over 90 years, as long as we've got plenty of other ones there to do the job. So we have a lot of redundancy built into this structure, but it's very similar to the structure of a muscle, with the endoneurium around the individual axon, the perineurium around the fascicle, same term, and the epineurium surrounding the entire nerve itself. So, okay, and of course, this is what it looks like up close. Again, these are thousands and thousands of axons grouped together here. So. Now, our nerves are usually a combination of afferent and efferent fibers, meaning that some parts of the nerve are sensory. Those are afferent. Sensory is afferent. Sensory always comes into the spinal cord or into the brain. So they're either sensory, bringing information into the central nervous system. They can be motor only, sending stuff out away from the central nervous system, out to an effector, a muscle cell, a gland, whatever. Or sometimes they're mixed. Sometimes they have both sensory and motor components. Now they use different axons for the sensory part of the nerve and for the motor part of the nerve, but sometimes the nerves are going to be mixed. A sensory nerve that is only sensory would be like the optic nerve. The optic nerve is sensory only. It sends signals to the brain from the eyeball, and that's all it does. That's sensory. A motor nerve would be a somatic motor nerve that sends a signal to skeletal muscle and only skeletal muscle. That's a motor nerve. A mixed nerve are like many of the spinal nerves are mixed because they have both a sensory component and a motor component sharing the nerve together. So in the peripheral nervous system, we have the cell bodies. Remember, we have, think about how sensory receptors work. We have a dendrite, and the end of the dendrite is the free nerve ending. And if the dendrite is depolarized, it's a graded potential, and it has to get its graded potential to the axon hillock of the cell body. And if it can hit threshold, then we have an action potential. We call the cell bodies the ganglia. The ganglia. Now, the cell bodies are either, they can be close to the spinal cord or they can be close to the effector. We may have the cell body near an organ, or we may have the cell body right up next to the spinal cord. But the ganglia are the cell bodies, so you still have to get threshold to get an action potential. Yeah. Now, what about our nerves? I said we don't get new ones. No, but we can repair them. Not in the central nervous system. We can't repair central nervous system neurons, at least not yet. Apparently, the oligodendrocytes prevent that. The oligodendrocytes say, no, damage is damage, and you're done. The astrocytes form scar tissue, and scar tissue is never our friend. Scar tissue gets in the way of anything. If you've got a scar on your body anywhere, you know that the scar tissue doesn't, on your skin, it doesn't have hair on it, it doesn't have sensory receptors, it doesn't do anything, it's simply a placeholder. And apparently the same thing is true with the scar tissue the astrocytes form in the CNS. And so once we can get around that, we can perhaps get the central nervous system to regenerate itself. The peripheral nervous system, though, is different. The peripheral system will use the Schwann cells to form a healing tube around the site of the injury. If an axon is cut in the peripheral system, it can grow back together again. The Schwann cells form a protective covering around the site of the injury, and the ends of the axon will regenerate and reconnect, and they'll work again. Now, if that wasn't the case, then what would be the point of trying to do transplants? What would be the point of trying to reattach body parts that have been cut off or yanked off, in trauma? What would be the point of a kidney transplant if it wouldn't function? So we, for whatever reason, the peripheral system allows us to, that the Schwann cells don't have any kind of blocking action like the oligodendrocytes, their counterpart, do. So, okay, now that leads us then up to the brain and the cranial nerves. Now there are 12 cranial nerves, 12 pairs. We've talked about some of them already. We've talked about the optic nerve. We've talked about the olfactory nerve. I've mentioned several times the hypoglossal nerve that controls swallowing. That's one of the cranial nerves. The vagus nerve that innervates our heart and tells it to slow down is one of the cranial nerves. So we have a facial nerve. We have the trigeminal nerve. The trigeminal nerve is called trigeminal because it has 3 branches to it. One that goes near the eyes, one that goes on the maxilla, and one on the mandible. That's the one where you usually get that numbed up when you're going to have dental work done. We have a trigeminal nerve on each side. Now, these 12 pairs of nerves are mixed. Most of them are mixed. Most of them are a combination of motor and sensory. The optic nerve is sensory. The olfactory nerve is sensory. The rest of them are pretty much a combination of both. So, and there are many mnemonics that allow you to remember the order. One that's been around for forever. If you look at the first letter of each nerve, you have this mnemonic that says, "On old Olympus towering tops, a Finn and German viewed some hops." And if you learn that ridiculous little phrase, it will tell you the order of, at least it'll give you the first letter of each of the cranial nerves. That mnemonic has been around for probably 100 years. If you look up cranial nerve mnemonic, there's all sorts of variations at work in there. And at some point you may have to be challenged to remember that. We don't have time for that. But these are the cranial nerves. What do they do? Well, olfactory is smell, optic, vision, oculomotor, moving the eyeball. Trochlear also moves the eyeball. The trigeminal has a role to play with the eye and with sensation across the face and pain around your jaw. It also helps with chewing. So abducens is going to be for the eye. Facial expression, part of your taste buds too. Vestibulocochlear, that's your auditory nerve and your equilibrium. The cochlear branch of that is hearing. The vestibular branch is equilibrium. The glossopharyngeal is taste as well as gag, the gag reflex. The vagus nerve is parasympathetic. It innervates the heart. It also allows us to gag when we detect an odor or a taste, or we are choking on something. The accessory nerve allows us to shrug our shoulders, and the hypoglossal nerve, that little itty bitty nerve that comes down from the medulla, it goes to that tiny little foramen right next to the great big old foramen magnum. Little tiny, remember the hypoglossal canal on either side of the foramen magnum? Just nod your head and make me feel good, thank you. that nerve controls our ability to swallow and to speak. And many times, if your patient has experienced a stroke or trauma to the brainstem, stroke in the brainstem, trauma to the brainstem, and they have difficulty swallowing, it's a good bet that they've damaged the medulla, because the medulla is controlling the tongue and the mouth through the hypoglossal nerve. So pretty good indicator that something's going on there. Unfortunately, individuals that have a stroke in the brainstem frequently have dementia, and they can't communicate to you that they can't swallow properly anymore. And perhaps your first indicator may be they develop pneumonia. You know, if they have a stroke on Monday and they lose their ability to swallow properly, you're not going to know till about Friday, when they start developing pneumonia, that they can't swallow properly. You know, particularly if you're in the stage of they have to be fed. You know, and your dementia patients in their late stages are usually unable to feed themselves. So, okay. Olfactory, well, we've seen that from the discussion on the brain. There's the olfactory nerve and the olfactory tract. Remember, once we enter the central nervous system, they're called tracts no longer. The optic nerve connects the retina to the central nervous system. You know, we see problems here with visual field defects and visual acuity. Ocular motor, both proprioception and the ability to manipulate our eye muscles, particularly in accommodation, being able to adjust the shape of the lens for close vision. So, trochlear nerve, proprioception, and some condition known as strabismus can occur if our nerve. This is where we get someone is, we say they're cross-eyed, or they have double vision. Their eyes are tilted in towards the midline, because that nerve is allowing this to happen, pulling the eyeballs in. Now, here is one that you will encounter a lot. This is trigeminal nerve. There are 3 branches to it. This is the one that we deal with when we have dental work. We have to block the sodium channels in the trigeminal nerve. It has 3 parts. That's why we call it trigeminal. The first part is near the eyes. The middle part is the maxillary branch that innervates the maxilla on each side, and then the lower part is the mandibular. So it comes across, you know, easy way to remember is just take your fingers like this and put it on your face. That's the trigeminal nerve. It stimulates our ability to chew. It's not one of the big chewing muscles, but it stimulates the chewing muscles. And it deals with touch and pain and temperature on the face. So, and if we want to do dental work, we have to block a branch of that nerve, or several branches, for example. Here we have the abducens nerve. It's sensory and motor. Here's another one. The facial nerve deals with the facial muscles as well as taste. Vestibulocochlear, balance and sound. The cochlear is what we used to call the auditory nerve, and the vestibular branch deals with balance. Okay. And if you decide to take up sword swallowing for whatever reason, then you would be convincing your glossopharyngeal nerve to let you do this. We use the glossopharyngeal nerve to swallow. You know, not swords, but swallow anything, like even eating your 2-week-old Easter eggs, you know. So it elevates the throat, the oropharynx, so that you can swallow properly. So vagus nerve, you'll hear a lot about the vagus nerve in AP2. The vagus nerve innervates the heart. It slows down the heart rate. The reason our heart rate is 70 beats a minute is because the vagus nerve dumps acetylcholine into the pacemaker of the heart. Without acetylcholine from the vagus nerve, our heartbeat would be running around 100 to 110 beats per minute instead of 70. So the vagus nerve keeps the heart rate down. But this is also the nerve that can be stimulated if we raise the inner abdominal pressure, because the nerve innervates down to the abdomen and up to the lower jaw, as well as the heart. And this is why your patient who is increasing their inner abdominal pressure, they're constipated. They're trying to they're straining to empty their bowels. When you do that, you compress these muscles here in the rectus abdominis. That raises the internal pressure here, trying to force fecal matter out of the large intestine. It also stimulates the vagus nerve when it's stimulated by that change in pressure, it releases more acetylcholine into the heart and slows the heart down even more. So you go to pick up something really heavy and you're straining and it's really, really heavy and you get a little dizzy, or your vision sort of comes in there on you, or you get a little, disoriented. Now imagine you've got a heart patient who is taking medication for chest pain, which causes them to get constipated. People that are constipated are uncomfortable. They want to empty their bowels, so they strain, and they may strain themselves into dying by causing their heart to have too much acetylcholine. So it happens. That's why if you're dealing with cardiac patients, you got to be very careful with them, particularly when they have to go empty their bowels. And particularly if they're elderly, because you know how old people are. All they like to do is talk about when they last emptied their bowels. So that and colonoscopies. So anyway. The spinal accessory nerve, it innervates the sternocleidomastoid and the trapezius. Remember our good old sternocleidomastoid? It turns our head for us. And it may even have a lot to do with our rotator cuff too. And then number 12, the hypoglossal nerve. Again, controlling the muscles of the tongue when we swallow. If the medulla is damaged in a stroke or with trauma, and they stick out their tongue will actually end up pointing in the direction of the side that's been damaged. So another quick and dirty test to see if there's something going on. The first sign may be that they can't speak well, or they can't swallow well, but that's something that's difficult to catch. If your patient is not verbal, it's very hard to pick up that they're not swallowing well. So now the spinal nerves, there are 31 pairs of spinal nerves, 8 cervical, 12 thoracic, 5 lumbar, 5 sacral, and 1 coccygeal. The spinal cord extends down to the end of T12. So it's about 18 inches in length, and we have paired spinal nerves coming in on both sides, 31 pairs altogether. They are both motor and sensory. They come into the spinal cord. And each of these spinal nerves have what we call a root. We have a ventral root and a dorsal root. So it's sort of like it's like wiring. For example, if you've got speaker wire, you've all seen speaker wire, right? Okay, and you have two copper wires inside the speaker wire. And if you pull it apart at the end, you're going to have a wire this way and a wire that way. Well, that's how the spinal nerves are built. They have a sensory side and a motor side. It's like two separate wires. Those wires are insulated in the speaker wire. They don't come together, because if they come together, it doesn't work. It shorts itself out. We have in the spinal nerves, we have a ventral root, which is the ventral wire, and we have the dorsal root. The ventral root is for motor. The dorsal root is sensory. Now, the way our spinal cord is put together, the spinal cord has a dorsal horn and a ventral horn. Let me put this up here. Now, here's our spinal cord right here. Now, this is the ventral side is the front. Your belly side is the ventral side. The dorsal side is your back. Think of the dorsal fin on a shark, okay? We don't have dorsal fins, but if we did, it'd be on our back. Now, this is the ventral surface here. This is the ventral horn in the spinal cord. Ventral horn here, dorsal horn here on the back side, and another dorsal horn here. The dorsal root of the spinal nerve joins at the dorsal horn. The ventral root joins at the ventral horn. Now, sensory input comes in here into the spinal cord on the dorsal horn. The dorsal root, the end of the end of the sensory nerve, connects to the dorsal horn. Down here, this is the ventral horn. The ventral root for motor goes out here, and it looks something. Let me bring it up back on the. Like, looks something like this. You can see here on the illustration, here's our nerve coming in here. There goes the sensory part into the dorsal horn. There's the dorsal root going into the dorsal horn. Out here is the motor, is the ventral root connecting to the ventral horn. Motor goes out, sensory comes in. If you look at it in cross section, sensory appears to come in on the top and motor appears to go out on the bottom. The sensory is dorsal, motor is ventral. And there's an inner neuron in between, a little purple inner neurons there. Because remember, those are going to be processing information. We're always going to process information in the gray matter in there. But of all 31 pairs, because you're going to have one on each side, coming in from the left side, coming in from the right side, each spinal nerve is going to have, each pair is going to have the dorsal root and the ventral root. Dorsal is sensory, ventral is motor. That is chapter 13. So now let's go ahead and move into go into motor. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to start chapter 14 and see how far we get. Otherwise, I'll wrap it up on Thursday and then move into the, hopefully, we'll do the final exam review Thursday afternoon. So, okay, let me bring this up. Okay, now, this is all about the autonomic nervous system. The peripheral nervous system has been the overarching structure here because the peripheral nervous system feeds into and out of the central nervous system. Peripheral nervous system had the sensory input and motor output. You have somatic motor output for skeletal muscle control, and you have the autonomic system which controls all the smooth muscles, the cardiac muscles, and the glands. So the autonomic nervous system does a lot of work that we're not aware of. It's going to innervate all the smooth muscle that surrounds our digestive tract. We're not thinking about food that we've eaten. It's being processed. You know, whatever you had for breakfast is being processed now through your digestive system and working its way through the small intestine towards the large intestine. We don't have to think about it. It's going to be taken care of. It innervates the smooth muscles around our blood vessels so that our blood vessels can shrink or expand depending on the need. You go outside today and it's about, I don't know, 50 degrees, 60 degrees, whatever it is. If it's cool outside and you weren't prepared for it, you might get cold. So our blood vessels are going to shrink. The ones leading to the skin will shrink so that we don't lose a lot of body heat. But if you went outside and it was 100 degrees out there, we'd be letting our blood vessels to the skin expand to radiate as much heat as we can so we can get rid of that extra body heat. So cardiac muscle, we tell our heart to speed up or slow down when we're doing something. Running up a flight of stairs, we want the heart to beat faster. Sitting relaxed, we want our heart to slow down. We don't have to stop and think about it. You know, hey, slow down, you know, it does it automatically. We sweat when we get hot. You know, we don't have to stop. We do that automatically. You know, we release saliva to lubricate our mouth when we eat. Don't have to think about that either. You know, all these things are subconscious. We're not aware of them. We know that they're happening because we're aware when we sweat. We know when we have saliva. You ever notice how much saliva you seem to generate when you're in a dentist chair? It's like, I'm going to die because I'm drowning in my own saliva. You know, I'm probably on my 3rd gallon of saliva. And it's actually about that much. You know? Yeah, and they're sucking it out. Yeah. You know, I hate that. You know, so, you know, don't tell me to spit, I'll spit, you know. So anyway, we're aware of it. We're aware of saliva and sweating. We're not aware of the fact that our blood's being moved around because, you know, we don't have enough blood to keep all of our vessels full all the time. We're always a couple of units shy of a full load. So we always have to move our blood around. So anyway, this is the organization. Peripheral system feeds into the central nervous system. The peripheral system has both a sensory side, we just talked about that, and a motor output side. Somatic is all skeletal muscle. Autonomic is everything else. And the autonomic system is broken out into both a sympathetic side and a parasympathetic side. The parasympathetic side is the dominant side. Now, the somatic side is skeletal muscle. The autonomic side is going to be smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. You're going to have neurons. You're going to have motor neurons, but you're going to have different target organs. You're going to have different pathways. You're going to have different locations of the cell bodies, and you're going to use different neurotransmitters. And the neurotransmitters that you're going to use may not do the same thing. In skeletal muscle, acetylcholine is our neurotransmitter of choice, and it's excitatory. It makes us contract. But in the heart, acetylcholine is inhibitory. It slows it down. Same neurotransmitter. Here, it slows down our heart rate. In our arm, it tells it to do things, to contract. Plus, the autonomic nervous system covers a larger range of target structures. Something else we see that's different. In the somatic nervous system, in skeletal muscle, we have a nerve that innervates a muscle cell or a muscle. We have a axon that may innervate 300 muscle cells individually, a motor unit. And that's all it does. It is one axon going to a muscle cell. That's it. Very simple. But in the autonomic nervous system, we don't have one axon, we have two. We have two neurons involved here. We have what's known as the preganglionic neuron and the postganglionic neuron. Preganglionic means, it sounds very sophisticated, it's just the axon in front of the cell body, the axon leading to the cell body. With the autonomic nervous system, the cell bodies are in the central nervous system. The postganglionic neuron is the axon after the cell body. So you have a preganglionic axon and a postganglionic axon. And you have the synapse at the cell body, and you have the synapse at the effector. There's two different synapses taking place here. And so you have to, also, let me show you the diagram here and you'll make more sense out of it. So there we go. This is what I'm talking about. At the top, that's a motor nerve up there. You got your cell body on the left-hand side, you got your myelinated axon, and you're releasing acetylcholine and you get your contraction. It's excitatory. In the autonomic side, you can have a preganglionic neuron and a postganglionic neuron. For example, I'll get back to in more detail on this, but here is the preganglionic axon right here. Here is the postganglionic axon there. So you have your cell body here, your cell body's here in the central nervous system. There's another cell body out here. You have an axon here and another one here. So you have two axons involved here, two neurons. Everything in the autonomic nervous system involves two neurons. Now let me go back here now. We know that in the somatic system for skeletal muscle, it's only acetylcholine, it's always excitatory or stimulatory, but in the autonomic nervous system, all the preganglionic neurons are going to release acetylcholine. So everybody in the autonomic nervous system uses acetylcholine as its first of the two neurotransmitters. So your preganglionic neuron is always releasing acetylcholine. The postganglionic neurons can also release acetylcholine, or they might release norepinephrine. It just depends. And so it can be excitatory, it can be inhibitory. Acetylcholine can be inhibitory on the heart, excitatory on smooth muscle in the airway. Norepinephrine can be excitatory on smooth muscle around blood vessels, or it can be inhibitory around the digestive tract, for example. So same neurotransmitters, different results. But the only difference here between the in the autonomic nervous system is everybody uses acetylcholine for its preganglionic neuron, the neuron in front of the cell body. The postganglionic neuron is either going to use norepinephrine or acetylcholine. Now, who uses what? Well, let me show you this on back. I needed to put this in here earlier. So, okay, the sympathetic nervous system uses acetylcholine on its preganglionic neuron. You see it right there. The postganglionic neuron releases norepinephrine. And norepinephrine is going to either stimulate or inhibit the effector. Now remember, everybody uses acetylcholine on their preganglionic neuron. The sympathetic side uses norepinephrine on the postganglionic neuron. In the parasympathetic side, which is the dominant side, it's acetylcholine on the preganglionic neuron, it's acetylcholine on the postganglionic neuron. So we use acetylcholine a lot. And again, it too can be excitatory or inhibitory. Now, do these systems work together? Yes. It doesn't operate in a vacuum. For example, skeletal muscle, innervated by one neuron, and depending on acetylcholine to stimulate the skeletal muscle to generate an action potential, is under control of the somatic nervous system. But what happens when you start exercising? Or maybe something as simple as running up a flight of stairs. Your skeletal muscles are going to get more active. They need more oxygen. They have carbon dioxide they have to get rid of. So the autonomic nervous system will start releasing epinephrine into the heart to make the heart beat faster, because cells need to get rid of CO2 and they need more glucose because you're doing more exercise. So yes, your motor signal is saying, hey, let's start lifting weights, or let's run up 10 flights of stairs, or run through the parking lot to get to the car because it's raining. So you're using your skeletal muscles, but you're burning glucose. You got to replace that glucose. You got to get rid of the carbon dioxide. Your heart has to beat faster. So the autonomic system kicks in and says, hey, we've detected that we're getting more acidic. It means we got to breathe faster to blow off the CO2. We also need more glucose. So we got to start releasing glucose and moving that around. Let's raise our blood pressure too at the same time that we're beating faster. And let's increase the force of contraction to send more blood out. All that is going on. And let's breathe faster. The medulla says, I can do that. I can make us breathe faster. The medulla also says, I can make our heart rate go up. The liver says, hey, I can release more glucose. All under the control of the autonomic system. The only thing that we thought of was, let's run up the stairs. That's the only thing we thought of. That was the only thing that was voluntary. Everything else is involuntary. Because we don't operate in an isolated unit. We decide to do something, and so we're telling our skeletal muscle to do something, but we have to support it, and that's where the autonomic system comes in. Anyway, yeah. So preganglionic is always acetylcholine. Postganglionic is acetylcholine in the parasympathetic side, norepinephrine on the sympathetic side. So the parasympathetic side is our rest and digest and defecate. It is maintenance, it's repair, it's recycle. This is let's have a large meal and then sit down and relax. That's the parasympathetic side, to rebuild things. The sympathetic side is the emergency, the high stress, the short-term activity, the fight or flight response. You're driving down the road and somebody runs out in front of you, and you hit your brakes, try and drive out of the way, and whatever else you do, or somebody pulls out in front of you, or whatever. Sudden stress, sudden crisis, you respond quickly, or maybe you don't. That's also part of the fight or flight response. Short-term activity, a lot of glucose available, a lot of energy available to do something very short-term. It takes a long time to recover from that kind of activity. Now, we see that just because we have these two divisions here, that we have most of our organs. Oh, hey, the bus is out. It's out there in the parking lot now. It's way over there. So anyway, blood drive, in case you're interested. Okay, so most of our organs are going to be innervated by both sympathetic and parasympathetic neurons, because a lot of things that we depend on, sometimes we have to excite the organs, sometimes we have to inhibit the organs. Now, the thing is that when we have dual innervation, we usually are going to be antagonistic. We don't always like to have you know, rest and digest is great in its place, but sometimes we have to be excitable too. So there's a lot of antagonistic responses between the parasympathetic side and the sympathetic side. What happens when you have dual innervation. The same organ may be receiving signals from both sides. The heart's a good example. The heart is innervated by the parasympathetic side through the vagus nerve, which releases acetylcholine to slow the heart rate down. But the heart is also innervated by the cardiac nerve, which is from the sympathetic side, which releases epinephrine, which causes the heart rate to go up. Dual innervation, not intervention, innervation. You have both divisions innervating the heart, as an example. Same with breathing. Slow down the breathing rate, speed up the breathing rate. So we have, many of our organs are going to have both sympathetic and parasympathetic controls. So now our parasympathetic side, that's our rest, our relax, our digest, our defecate system. After a large meal, your blood glucose is way up and your digestive system is actively processing all that food. Your blood pressure is down, the heart rate's down, your breathing rate's down because you're not doing anything, but your gut is very busy. The gastrointestinal system from the esophagus down to the anus is very busy. It's processing, it's churning, it's breaking, it's digesting, it's absorbing, it's processing some more, and it's maybe even working on the indigestible waste products. Our pupils are constricted. We're not looking at things off in the distance. We're looking at things up close. Perhaps we're sitting in front of the TV and we're half awake. So this is the parasympathetic side. Rest, digest, repair, defecate, whatever. The parasympathetic side, though, is not a massive systemic-wide effect. Whereas fight or flight, whereas the sympathetic side tends to be have a whole body effect when it kicks in for fight or flight, the parasympathetic side is going to be sort of individual. The parasympathetic side involves different nerve tracks, nerves connecting different organs. For example, we're using acetylcholine as our neurotransmitter. Our preganglionic and our postganglionic neurons use acetylcholine. Acetylcholine causes our airway to constrict. We constrict our airway. We also stimulate the small intestine to move food through there, so we can absorb nutrients. The same with the large intestine, so we can continue to process the indigestible material to retain water and make vitamin K and stuff like that. We also see the detrusor muscle, the muscle that in males, which controls the location of the testes, how far down the testes descend in the scrotum. They're going to pull the testes and the scrotum up closer to the abdominal wall. The ciliary muscle around the lens that allows us to accommodate for close vision is going to constrict, and our lenses are going to be looking at close vision. Now, those are all stimulating effects, but the opposite's also going to be true. We're going to lower our heart rate. We're going to increase the amount of acetylcholine going into the heart. Lowers our heart rate. We're going to dilate our blood vessels. It means they're going to enlarge. We're going to increase the amount of action going on in the digestive tract, and our sphincters, which control the anus and control our urethra, are going to become relaxed. And the urge to defecate is going to rise. The urge to urinate is going to rise. So we have different organ systems are going to be affected differently by the same neurotransmitter. It's not going to be one massive, we're all going to rest and digest. We're all going to rest and relax and digest now. Well, the digestive system has to be stimulated because so it can digest stuff. Parasympathetic system is, again, it's going to be our rebuild, our maintenance and repair. It is the dominant system. It causes us to salivate, causes our eyes to water, causes us to urinate, digest, and defecate. Our airway, our heart rate drops, our airway narrows, and our pupil narrows. So we have both a combination of some excitatory, some inhibitory actions here. Now, one thing though that the parasympathetic system does and does very well for us is if you've ever heard of individuals that were so scared, they urinated on themselves or they emptied their bowels. It's not unusual, it happens. Individuals in combat for the first time are often so terrified that they empty their bowels. You know, it occurs. When the fear level, you know, normally when a person is scared, their amygdala says, hey, this is a scary situation. And that usually triggers the fight or flight response to say, stand and fight or run away or just process. The third choice is to process and process and process. What happens with, in this case, is if the fear is so great and there is no way, the individual sees no way out of it, they blast past the sympathetic response and go to an overwhelming parasympathetic response, which causes all their sphincters to open up. Their bowels empty, their bladder empties, they defecate, they urinate on themselves because they are so terrified. You know, they're terrified beyond the point of being able to process the information correctly, and all they can think of is, is getting away. Nothing. They can't really even process what to do because they are, you know, they've blown past the fight or flight part of running away. They're just, you know, going to have this massive parasympathetic let go of the sphincters. Real quick, good example of a parasympathetic response. When I was 12 years old, I was walking home from my grandma's house with my mom. And as I lived in a small town and nothing ever happened there. And as we were coming down to the end of it, we were getting ready to cross the street. And as we got to cross, right as we were ready to go, there was a T-bone accident right in front of us. That never happens in a small town. You never see accidents. Well, this one was so powerful, it pushed the car that got T-boned right up to the edge of the sidewalk where we were standing. Now, my response as a 12-year-old is, cool. You know, I'd never seen an accident before. I was like, hey, this is great. And my mom's reaction was to immediately blast into a sympathetic response, grab me. Bear in mind, I'm 12 years old, so I'm not like a little kid at that point. Yanked me back to my grandmother's house. And my mom immediately rushed into the bathroom and she had a massive bout of diarrhea. So she went from sympathetic to parasympathetic in the space of about 30 seconds. So, and I never understood what, you know, I'm just like, I want to go see the accident, you know, no, stay in the house, you know, but I want to, you know, no, you know, and she's in the bathroom, you know, being miserable. So a classic example of a parasympathetic response to some sort of, you know, very high fear situation. So, okay, we'll stop here and we'll wrap this all up on Thursday. And let me get us out of here. Anybody have any questions on anything?
Oh, one other thing. I know you probably can't really speculate on this. It's a collective thing for the final exam, but would you say that final exam review presentation that's up on eLearn is a good review as well in addition to
Yes, yes, it is. It's very good. So I would follow that.
Okay. So I was
So,
just making sure it was current and everything.
yeah. There are only so many ways to ask the same question. So, okay. Any other questions?
It's like 155 slides or something. Granted, they're like multiple choice questions.
Yeah, so, and that's probably what we're going to go through in class on Thursday.
I have a class right after here on Thursday, so I'll probably have to leave. So I'll watch the.
If you watch the video, yeah, because I'll record it. So, okay, then I will see you all on Thursday then.